My name is Brandon Harper. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Cenetron Diagnostics, which is part of the Versiti Clinical Trials suite of services.
I am Dr. Dan Waxman. I am Vice President and Senior Medical Director for Versiti Blood Center.
Excellent, thank you. As we get started, I think I'd like to jump straight in and discuss some of those key challenges or obstacles facing clinical trials at the moment. So Brandon, could you talk to me a little bit about what some of those key challenges may be?
I think it's probably speed to market and efficiency of the processes, right? It's such a competitive landscape right now that getting your drug approved as quickly as possible obviously benefits pharma companies on the financial side, but just in general, it's a race. It's a race every day. And so it's a race not just with pharma, but on our side as well, and just trying to come up with processes that make everything more integrated and easier for the client.
Excellent, thank you. And how do these challenges affect biomaterials development and delivery, Dr. Waxman? Are they similar, or are there any other knock-on effects that need to be considered as well?
Yeah, the challenge is similar. I mean, the big issue in terms of biomaterials really is that, the regulatory environment is very complex and it's dynamic. And so, cell therapy manufacturers, and drug manufacturers, they really want to be confident that, we are doing things appropriately and being guided through the regulatory pathways. And they really need to know that, what we're doing on the biomaterials is completely streamlined, but also you got to follow the rules. And this, being part of, Versiti Blood Center, we live and breathe in the regulatory environment, and 24/7 we're bringing life-saving blood products to patients. And so now getting into biomaterials, it's taking that background and experience and using them towards biomaterials.
Excellent, thank you. How have clinical trials been affected by COVID, and what have you done or are you doing to overcome either exacerbated or perhaps even novel challenges?
Wow, I'd say, if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's expect the unexpected, and just to be prepared. I think we saw a big shift in the way clinical trials are run during COVID-19, and there were lots of issues from supply side. The FDA kind of issued some guidance about decentralizing supply chain and clinical trials in general. We saw a shift from patients being seen at doctor's offices to being shifted and being seen at home. So you had a lot of home visits as opposed to doctor's office visits. Supply chain, I'll tell you, was one of the biggest problems that we ran into. And just in general, the supplies that were needed for clinical trials or projects outside of clinical trials changed drastically. We have one client that we worked with for years. We manufacture a molecular transport medium for them. And historically, we might manufacture 100,000 tubes a year. And starting in about March or April of 2020 through January of this year, we ended up manufacturing about 8 million tubes. So it was a huge scale up for us, personnel side, manufacturing side, clinical trial side. So, trying to keep our staff safe, separated, doing everything we could. I mean, we run a lot of oncology trials and infectious disease trials as well. So we couldn't not be in the office. We could not be in the lab. So we were here. And so trying to find ways to do that and do it safely, but also pivoting our business model a little bit. We were very clinical trial heavy at one point and moving over to manufacturing when the clinical trial piece slowed down because they couldn't see patients. So I think that was the biggest change, was really trying to overcome staffing and really just supply chain in general.
Could you talk to me a little bit about how perhaps you might have partnered with people outside of a special, outside of, I suppose, expected realms of partnerships?
Yeah, so during the project where we were manufacturing the molecular transport medium, cryovials, or the vials that were typically used to store this medium, weren't available. They just weren't available. They came from overseas. You couldn't get them in. There were huge delays in having them manufactured. And we saw a company, an American company, step up to the challenge. And it was actually Coca-Cola. And so Coca-Cola manufactured, they were preformed tubes. So if you can imagine, they're 20-ounce Coca-Cola bottles or Dasani water bottles. Before they were blown up into the actual bottle itself, they were called preforms, and they were small tubes that had a great seal. And we were able to obtain a couple of million of those from them through our partner that we were working with to manufacture the transport medium. They provided those so that we could get those out so that they could be used for testing of COVID.
I find it really interesting. It's just another element of innovative thinking that you perhaps wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
So how about with biomaterials provisions during, well, on that theme of innovation, have there been any unique opportunities for innovation there?
There has been. I think that the thing that we learned, spending my time a lot with the blood center side of business is, during the pandemic, we were getting very limited access to traditional ways of recruiting and collecting donors. So, blood centers, 70% of the time, they're going out and to the donor and going to universities and high schools, which can count for 20, 30% of the donor base. Well, during the pandemic, those were closed or they were virtual. And so we had to go back to how we traditionally had done things, is have the donors come to us. And this is really how we are building a biomaterials donor base is to recruit those contributors to come to us, because we have our fixed sites with our apheresis technology. And this apheresis technology we use every day. I mean, we're collecting donors, we're collecting stem cells for therapeutics. Well, now we can use that very same technology and have donor sites that we're bringing in, so we can recruit, which is something that we really know how to do, and then build this pedigree donor base and be able to get all the types of testing, because we have our own infectious disease testing laboratory, and so we're able to do infectious disease markers. We have HLA, so we can do HLA typing and all other types of testing that we can do, so that we have not only a donor base that we're built, but it's highly differentiated, and so that if certain companies say, okay, we need these type of donors with these attributes, we can go into our file system. So we've really learned in the last 2 years, okay, how do we bring people to us and also do it in a safe and regulated environment, and so this is really how it's been a good transition, going from our day-by-day work with a regular donor base and now building this other donor base for biomaterials.
I think one of those key themes we've hit there is the scaling up essentially during the pandemic. So what has it been like really to scale up clinical trial operations in the midst of a global pandemic?
Well, if I said it was easy, I would be a liar. It's probably been one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. I've been in clinical trials for a little over 20 years. And it's been one of the most difficult pieces, and really more on the supply side than anything else, because it's just not something you could have expected. You couldn't see that coming. And so I think that was one of the biggest problems. We've been very fortunate to be able to bring enough supplies in and have them available at any time. But we really had to revamp our systems internally, on supply chain and making sure you have supplies for these clinical trials. You really needed, I guess, pre-COVID, you needed to look out a month or two. What we've learned during COVID is now we have to look out 6, 8, 10 months and see what the usage is going to be, because sometimes it's taking 6 to 8 months to get these supplies in. So we've had to redesign our systems to be able to look out that far, see, okay, this is what we think that our usage is going to be, and then probably double that, because you just don't know what you don't know. And then try and make sure you're getting all of those supplies in and be ready. And not just on the supply chain, but on labor as well, making sure we have enough lab people. The other thing we saw was obviously clinical trials were put on hold for a short period of time because of COVID, and now everybody wants to start back up. Well, when that happens, you better be ready for it. And so we had to kind of preempt that a little bit and make sure that we had staff in place and were trained and ready to go when it started.
How does this compare to the scaling up of biomaterials over this time? Well, I think, the one thing that we're really working on is, to be very vertically integrated, kind of, so we can really, have one, stop shopping and so that, we've had this, decades long business in terms of blood and blood products. and now getting into biomaterials, it's really kind of saying, okay, how do we bring it in, into our supply chain, going through, we have a research institute that's very well renowned, and that, we've done a number of IRB approved protocols. So, it's, if you work with your IRBs and you work with different protocols and different entities, the one thing that Versiti has done for years is, we work with universities, we work with pharma, we've had a lot of long-standing relationships, and now we're even having brand new relationships, because the companies that are starting up are ones that had previously either been part of a university or another entity, and now they really are needing biomaterials, and getting a very highly characterized donor base, I think, is important. That's something that people can come to us and say, okay, we need this, and we need it in this time frame. That's the other thing I think that we really have worked on is, we know how to do just-in-time work, and so it's how do we meet our customers' expectations? Say, okay, well, I need these type of donors, these type of biomaterials, but I need them at this time. And just like, Brandon talking about what he was doing, during the pandemic. I mean, some companies came to him and said, look, we've got it. We need this now. And so I think that's important. And it's something that we pride ourselves in, and really, and as Brandon said, is having the staff, you really, because some of our staff are highly technical. When we're putting someone on an apheresis platform, this is technology that's tried and true, but for biomaterials, a donor needs to be on an apheresis device for a number of hours. And so it's, how do you do that? How do you give that donor a good experience so that they want to stay in your program? And so one of the things we do a lot is customer service, just with because everything starts with the donor. With biomaterials, everything starts right in that donor. And so if you get that right, then people will know, and the word will spread. And that's the other thing is when we recruit donors and we start in the front, it's okay, we've got to get this so that we have this solid donor base, and that we can really meet the needs of our customers.
Lovely, thank you. I think that's a really comprehensive answer there from both of you, actually. Just to summarize, though, a lot of what we've covered today relates to innovation. So where have you seen perhaps the strongest demand for innovation within your respective areas? And perhaps what has this meant for your area of expertise?
So for clinical trials, I would say flexibility and nimbleness, right? Being able to pivot and turn on a dime. And I think that's what we've seen because of COVID. We didn't know what to expect. I don't think anybody really knew what to expect. And so, when you have clinical trials that are ongoing, and some of these trials didn't stop, especially the oncology trials, a lot of those trials, they didn't stop, they couldn't. So, when you start to see new guidance that now we need to test for COVID antibodies, now we need to do a PCR test for COVID. Okay, but now we have these kits and this clinical trials already running. How do we do that? What do we do? How do we think about how do we get those samples? How do we get them back in? How do we get them tested? How do we get the results? And it's not something that could wait. It wasn't okay, we need 6 weeks to be able to do this. No, we need to have those supplies on site within a week and be ready to start testing. And then, like I said, we saw those patients that all of a sudden couldn't travel anymore. They couldn't get on a plane to go see the doctor. They couldn't do this. They couldn't do that. They couldn't drive. They couldn't go all of these other places. Doctors' offices were shut down. So now how do we care for those patients? How do we collect those samples? How do we monitor those patients? How do we make sure that they're safe while they're on the drug? And trying to come up with a way to do that, not just come up with a way to do it, but come up with a way to do it yesterday, right? I think that's the biggest thing that our clients were looking for.
And Dr. Waxman, for the biomaterial side?
So it really, as new research is going on and therapeutics are being developed, companies are really looking for very highly characterized, specific types of donors and materials. And so you have to have a donor base that you can go to. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to go recruit these donors now for this. It's all about what we're doing day by day now, recruiting donors every single day, doing a lot of characterization and testing and really looking at them and analyzing them so that this donor base is robust and ready to go. And so every day and this has been going on all during the pandemic. It's okay, how do we recruit these donors? And then have the testing methodology, which Versiti does. I mean, that's the other great thing is, we have a diagnostic testing lab, we have our donor viral testing lab, and we've got, HLA testing. And so we can do all this testing within our own, facility, and really be able to get that characterization, because, these companies are coming to us and say, okay, I've got a very specific type of project that I'm working on. That's the other thing is in terms of, and I think Brandon knows this very well, is project management, is really being able to manage a project from beginning all the way through it and to the end. And that's one thing that we have great project managers. I mean, because we do this all the time. I mean, we take on new projects, and we new types of programs. And if you don't have a good project management, you're gonna struggle. And we have excellent project management.
I think that brings us really nicely to a final question as we look ahead to the future and moving forward, perhaps beyond the pandemic and into what we hope is a little bit more of a world that resembles what we used to. But what do you see for the future of biomaterials and clinical trial delivery? What are the key obstacles that you'd say remain, and what are you doing to either mitigate or overcome those challenges?
In terms of, really is to have that one, the one-stop shop, so that you can, organization, a company, a research lab, they can come to us and say, this is what we need, and be able to say, okay, we can handle this, we can get you the biomaterials, we can, manage this, and really, and make it very specific. These are gonna be very, targeted types of therapies, things like that, and really be able and get to the, the pharma grade products. I mean, so you've got, all the right approvals and setup to do it. So I think it really is Versiti is your one-stop shop. You come to us, you bring up what you would want to do and what you need, and we'll do that for you.
What I would say is that for clinical trials, I think the changes that we've seen over the last year are probably here to stay. Like, I think we've all experienced that in the workplace, working from home, doing interviews by Zoom instead of in person. I think a lot of the changes we've seen where we're protecting ourselves from supply chain issues, where we are seeing patients at home and we're having to figure out ways to do that, where we're having to pivot and see studies constantly change. I think it's here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. I think it's here to stay.
Thank you to both Brandon and Dr. Waxman from Versiti for joining me for this Q&A. Unfortunately, that is all we've had time for this session, but you can find many more interviews and resources via the Insights and Resources section on the Facilitate website. That's all from me today. Thanks and goodbye.